Hello, everybody. We are welcoming our panel here today and all of you who may be attending to hear about. Today, I'm excited about it. This is stuff that people need to know about. This is going to be about VA aid and attendance, Medicaid waiver programs, how to qualify them, how to deal with them, and what they can really do for you. We have a great panel today. I'm real excited about having all these folks here. I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves. And when you do, please tell you who you are, what you do, the scope of services that you guys provide, and we'll start with that. And Rebecca, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for having me. I'm Rebecca Geyer with Rebecca Geyer and Associates. We're an estate planning and elder law firm located in Carmel. We help clients with all phases of estate planning, whether it is basic documents, putting them in place, to full service estate administration. We also do elder law planning in the form of counseling clients with regard to Medicaid, Medicare issues, VA benefits. We also handle guardianships and advance directives and prenuptial agreements, as well as some business matters and real estate transactions. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. Wes, I think that you're showing up on here as Matt, but that's your partner, so I'll let you explain that one. So, yeah.
Yes, he's handling some paperwork. So again, thanks, Jim, for having us. Our company's Senior Solutions Consulting. We've been around going on 21 years now. VA aid and attendance, Medicaid Waiver, and all the fun and paperwork that goes with all of those things. So we help get that stuff off of your plate and done for you, so you can focus on things like facilities and care and parents while we take care of the paperwork for you.
Thank you. Ron?
Yeah, Jim, Ron Wright with Wright and Associates. We're a general practice firm, do a lot of business law and litigation, other types of litigation, but we've become more and more involved with what I guess is sort of collectively referred to as elder law issues, which is estate planning and also long-term care. We've been representing veterans for the last 30 years, ever since they allowed us to involve ourselves with benefit programs, also doing appellate work for veterans. So know quite a bit and have had a lot of experience in the aid and attendance area. And because it's a sort of a compatible or the type of activity that one runs into the next, we do a lot of Medicaid as well. So in litigation, we do general litigation, but we also do litigation on will contests, guardianship, contested guardianships, removals of fiduciaries, that type of thing as well.
Well, thank you. Jeff?
I'm Jeff Stinson of the Stinson Law Firm, located on the northern side of Indianapolis. I help folks who are in need of long-term care. We help connect them with ways to afford the care without being completely impoverished, whether that be through Medicaid, VA pension. So that involves both some estate planning for long-term care on the front end or some crisis planning on the back end. I'm also work with a lot of folks who have children with special needs or disabled individuals who have come across a windfall, and I help protect public benefits and plan for, on the family side, taking care of that child when the parent who's primary caregiver and advocate and so on are no longer able to be there. Of course, I do some probate work as well, so guardianships and state administration, state and trust administration as well. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, guys. I am excited about this panel because this is one that has like some personal things for me in it, because I wish I'd have known you guys a long time ago. So as the person that was dealing with my in-laws, my parents, what have you, I never knew what an elder law attorney was, or a benefits specialist, like you, Wes. I didn't know about this stuff. With my in-laws, I was just given a form at the senior living community saying, well, here's your stuff to fill out for VA aid and attendance to help pay for this. And 18 months of fighting that battle with VA, keep sending it back to me rejected, was just maddening. I actually went through a congressman to get it done, which I'm thinking you shouldn't have to know somebody in Congress to get this done. And the second time I was dealing with it, my son turned me on to Jeff. That's the first person I met that was actually an elder law attorney. I didn't know, my elders didn't get in trouble. I didn't know why they needed an attorney, So anyway, but the differences were night and day. So, and I'm very excited about all you guys to be able to share with people why they need you, what will be there to benefit them through this whole process. It is a life-changing event. So with that, I'm going to throw this out there. Y'all can all of you can answer this question. So just jump in and tag on to each other how you like. This is VA Medicaid waiver at all 101 level class, right? So tell me, what is VA aid and attendance? What in the world, when you hear that term, what is it? What, from there, I'll let you guys start from that.
Well, since I touted our involvement with veterans, I guess I'll start out here first.
Okay.
One of the things about VA aid and attendance is many times veterans will go to their benefits officer at a VFW or a Legion Hall. And some of them are very, very good. Others sort of are thrown into the position, and they'll take the book out and they'll look at it and they'll tell the person, well, you just don't qualify for any benefits. And that's the same way really with Medicaid. A lot of people are misinformed on the Medicaid issue as well. And really, that's part of the job of an attorney or someone that works with veterans is to get them to qualify, be able to set up a plan. And to that extent, normally you're fairly successful. You may not give them exactly what they would hope to receive, but you put them on the path. I'll say this much and then let some of the others comment on this. One of the things that VA benefits do that are extremely helpful is that the VA now has a 3-year look back, where Medicaid still has the 5-year look back that they have. So many times, if the individual in need is a veteran, we're able to get them the VA benefits as a transitional matter to get on over to ultimately, if needed, use the Medicaid benefits as well. So it really is an area where you need to have somebody that knows a little bit and has a sense of how all the parts are put together. And I'll let others comment on this too. So.
I agree with what Ron said. The Veterans Administration is very helpful in that it does provide this aid and attendance benefit to veterans. This type of benefit is actually a non-service connected benefit. So you don't have to have been career military in order to receive it. But what this pension benefit does is it can help provide an additional sum of money on a monthly basis to pay for unreimbursed medical expenses that a senior typically is incurring as a result of a need for care. So maybe you have a loved one who is now in need of home health care or care in assisted living or in a nursing home, and their income is not sufficient to meet their care obligations on a monthly basis. Then the VA may provide an additional pension benefit to someone who did serve in the military during at least 1 day of active wartime and was honorably discharged if they meet certain qualifications, as Ron mentioned, subject to a 3-year look back for any transfers they may have made. They can be eligible for a pension benefit, which can be extremely helpful in having individuals pay for the cost of their care on a monthly basis. The only disadvantage I see with regard to the VA benefit, certainly you oftentimes need assistance in order to get an application completed in a timely fashion, as Ron noted. But the only problem is sometimes the VA pension, because there is a maximum amount that can be earned on a monthly basis from the pension, is not sufficient to cover care costs. And if you have a situation where someone is not going to have enough money to pay for their care or other resources to draw from, even with the pension benefit, sometimes Medicaid benefits are necessary because Medicaid is designed to pick up the difference between an individual's monthly income and the cost of their care.
Yeah, so just kind of expand on what Rebecca just said. The VA pension, because it has a maximum threshold, it's generally a better fit for folks who are in need of assisted living or home care, lower levels of care. When you get into higher levels of care that are much more expensive, that's typically when you need to look at Medicaid. The other thing I'll add is in regards to what Ron had said, there's your look back period is shorter for the VA pension. The other thing is that the VA pension resource limits are much more liberal than Medicaid, where we have a little under 130,000 total countable resource limit, where you've got a 2,000 countable resource limit for Medicaid. So sometimes it's an easier program to access without needing to do significant planning.
Okay. So we've been talking about VA. I will tell you that getting to know all you guys and learning from you over the last year or so has really helped me lower my level of anxiety, because after taking care of my family members and have seen how basically whatever savings you basically are putting a torch to within the second you go into assisted living or what have you, how expensive that care is. Knowing that these programs exist has put a lot of feeling of security to me anyway. So let's get into like Medicaid. What is Medicaid? I guess like we did with what is VA. And I know that in Indiana looks at Medicaid for seniors differently than some, and it works very hard for wealth preservation for that. So could you guys kind of fill us in on Medicaid and what that is?
Well, so Medicaid is distinguished from VA. Medicaid operates more like an insurance program. You don't get a cash benefit. Medicaid's paying your providers for you. It is a program that was originally designed for the indigent. However, over the decades after its creation, particularly around the late 80s, the scope was expanded a bit, that it would include a lot of middle class to qualify for the benefit. A lot of safe harbors were put into place. So in Indiana, we're real fortunate to have a service package that's fairly broad when it comes to long-term care and its Medicaid program. We'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about why that is. But Medicaid in Indiana, we can get services in the home, assisted living providers, or assisted living if you can find a provider, as well as nursing home care. But the key thing to remember there is you don't have to be completely impoverished. There are ways to satisfy the eligibility requirements without being completely destitute before you qualify. The key there is just to get a legal plan in place, to do some planning in order to shelter some of those assets. And I'll kind of let somebody else talk here if they want to expand on that.
One of the things that I mentioned with regard to aid and attendance is where people get their information, preliminary information, to determine whether or not possible benefits exist. And Jeff just brought up the fact that Medicaid is another area in which people are misinformed on that. Unfortunately, we get a lot of crisis planning when people are into the hospital. Matter of fact, that causes a snapshot date sometimes, and we're somewhat limited on what we can do for some people. So it really is important for people to be educated on the fact that they don't have to do a full spin down. That seems to be the general consensus from people, that they have to use up all their money. And that's just tragic, really, that they go under that misunderstanding. So the idea that they can get in with someone who looks at the entire plan, I'll go back to the veterans for a second. The idea that you can take somebody and work them, as Jeff and I think Rebecca both brought out, and sort of stage them along the line so that they're ready for the next thing, which ultimately it is for somebody impoverished. It is this insurance plan, which is Medicaid. So it takes some planning. We have too many occasions where unfortunately the snapshot date gets set early on before we even get involved. We have other, which rest of the panel knows what I'm talking about there, but what basically is it locks you in to some extent. But then there's just so many things that are available if it's a married couple or you have a community spouse that's involved as well. Those are all opportunities, some of which go away if it's not addressed early enough in the process.
Wes, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, one of the things that we've been pretty successful with under the Medicaid waiver, which helps pay for assisted living, which really isn't new, but it's been more popular in the last several years, is getting the VA benefit along with the Medicaid waiver program, because what that allows folks to do is to have a positive cash flow when normally you wouldn't think you could afford an assisted living at $3,500 to $4,500 a month on an income of maybe $2,000 a month. But if we can use the Medicaid waiver program and then add VA benefits to that as well, then a lot of our clients end up with maybe $1,000 to $1,500 of a positive cash flow every month. And they after they meet with all of us here, and they leave the office saying, I didn't know these programs were available. I didn't know I could do all these things. I've been told so many things by so many different people that, they're a little shell shocked when they come in, but they're pretty happy when they leave. So like everybody has said, talk to professionals and talk to as many people as you can and get the best advice before you go forward, because there's almost some program that's available for everybody, if not more than one program that can really get the care when it's needed before too many falls or too many health issues happen, and then their options are limited.
Yeah. I think we're really lucky in the state of Indiana to have Medicaid be an age-in-place program to provide for waiver benefits like Wes just touched on, that can provide for care in home or in adult day services, as well as in assisted living and nursing facilities. And like all of these gentlemen have mentioned, one of the great things about Medicaid is there's a lot of myths out there that you have to be completely impoverished. But in fact, Medicaid has lots of things, including what's known as spousal impoverishment rules, to ensure that assets can be retained. And especially with the married couple, if you have one spouse in need of care and one who is not, we have rules to ensure that the spouse who is not in need of care is not impoverished. And I know I can probably speak for all of us when I say that's one of the major concerns we see with families, is that due to the high cost of care, they're concerned that a spouse at home is going to not have sufficient income or assets in which to pay for themselves if the other spouse needs care. And by going to someone like those of us on this panel, you can ensure that things are administered properly and that both the spouse at home and the spouse in need of care are provided for and have the funds they need to maintain themselves and get care.
I'll tell you, this is why I'm having this panel. So I want this information out, because my own experience dealing with my in-laws back, this has been probably 15 years ago, but we were told specifically by the senior living place we were going to, that basically if we allowed them to go to Medicaid, we were these horrible kids that basically put them in the poorhouse with substandard care. Okay. And now the reason, now I know why. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to tell you all the details. They can tell them what's in their best interest. And they wanted us to pay private pay as opposed to Medicaid, where it was more profitable to them. Now, I just had a bad person at that particular place, but other people probably have as well. So we were the dutiful kids. We spent every dime they had. We ended up paying for 2 funerals out of pocket ourselves because we didn't know any better, because that's what we were told. Okay. So this is important information to get out. I know in one of our companies, our office, we had some people that were going through some situations, a spouse that was ill, that were actually considering getting a divorce to protect assets for the family. And I'm like, oh God, no. And I sent them to one of you guys. I can't remember. But anyway, so, but that information's out there, and the conversation at the water cooler, at the coffee shop or whatever still has those kinds of conversations. So that's why I want you guys here to help us with this, because I know it's not the case. It's not, what it is. And unfortunately, I've sent people to SACOA before to tell. And then Socola, it depends on who you pick up the phone. You get somebody that's new there that just reads it out of the book, and I've had that happen where all of a sudden, well, you can only have $2,000. You can, and so they didn't tell them they need to talk to you to help prepare and to get things done. What is the difference between Medicaid and Medicaid waiver? We throw these words around, but what does that really mean?
Well, so the Medicaid waiver services are additional services that a state has elected to include in its generally that's what this is, to include in their program. So I'm going to just kind of distill this down into a very broad, very small spectrum. In regards to long-term care, Indiana has elected to add services to their Medicaid program to help folks age in place. They've elected to add home and community-based services. Now, those services are not part of the federal umbrella of what a state has to offer. So the state has said, we want to offer these things. And generally, the states put a cap on the dollar amount they assign to these services. So the feds are waiving the requirement that every Medicaid recipient that applies gets these services. Now, let me qualify that, though, by saying, and Rebecca can back me up on this too, it's been a long, long time since there's been more demand for the services than the supply of dollars. There's been some days, but it's been a long time since that's happened.
It's probably been, I would say, 4 or 5 years since we had waiver slots where there was kind of a limit and there was a wait list in order to attain them. And really, we need to thank our state legislators who we speak to as elder law attorneys to ensure they understand the high demand for waiver services at home. And COVID is a perfect example of why that's so important. So many of the people that all of us speak to on a regular basis have concerns about making sure their loved ones have adequate care. But with COVID, they're concerned about putting them in any sort of assisted living arrangement or potentially in a nursing home. And so it's great that Medicaid can provide at-home services and that these waiver dollars exist to ensure they can receive home care benefits at a time where we want to keep them physically safe and ensure that they get the proper care that they need. So we've been lucky that our state legislators have been increasing the budgets for waivered services to ensure that there are slots available for everyone who needs them. And we haven't had any wait lists in several years as a result. So if you have a loved one who's trying to get care at home or through adult day services, or even in an assisted living facility that accepts Medicaid for payment, those waiver slots are available.
Yeah, it's been a godsend to have that waiver program for somebody who's lived in the person who's lived in assisted living for years and years and ran out of money, and now they're forced to make a decision of moving in with their kids or going to a nursing home that may not be appropriate only because they didn't have the waiver program previously to lean on to stay in a facility like that. So, secondarily, it's kind of about time that they've started to do this because it's so much cheaper to keep someone at home with a little bit of home care or in assisted living, where I think, the waiver program may pay out a couple $1,000 a month for assisted living versus multiple thousands of dollars a month for a nursing home because that was the only choice for care. So the expanded programs like Jeff touched on are really a savings over having to fund only nursing homes that are terribly expensive. Maybe not even an appropriate place for someone to be.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people like, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Thank you. One of the things a lot of people maintain, even when they're becoming infirmed, is they'd like to go back to their own home. And if they do have someone who can provide additional care, even there's a basis for compensation for those people. Not so much for a spouse, but at least for maybe a son or a daughter living with them in the infirm person's home. And they can do that with the help of a waiver as well, to bring in medical assistance if that's needed. So that's created an option which is more attractive to some families, just basically on the idea of being able to be in a familiar surrounding. The other way that it's used often is in with regard to assisted living facilities, where there may not be a bed open up in that facility for Medicaid. They have to get certification for the beds that are used for Medicaid. Maybe there isn't one open, and as Rebecca mentioned, there's a waiting list many times. or has been historically for those. But if you get into a facility that you can go in and get a waiver on the non-certified bed, in other words, the assisted living slot that's available, then you can transition ultimately over to the Medicaid if that's more convenient from the assisted living facility that you have. So there's a lot more flexibility in that type of situation than there would be if the option was simply go on Medicaid or go to assisted living as basically not on the Medicaid provisions.
Yeah.
Rebecca, do you still have something to add, or?
Oh, all I was going to say earlier was that I'm sure the reality for all of us is that none of our clients have ever come in and say they can't wait for a nursing home. So the nice thing is that when options like waiver, you don't have to say that your only option is a nursing home.
Yeah.
Just for
Rebecca,
clarity, Medicaid only pays for long-term care, like at a nursing home. Is that correct? Or do they do in-house, or is it waivers the only way you get the in-home or assisted living?
Correct. It's all the same requirements apply for financial requirements, I should say, for Medicaid in a nursing facility as they do in the waiver, but the waiver is what you have to apply for in order to receive Medicaid payment for in-home care, care in adult day services, or care in assisted living.
And from what I understand, you guys can clarify this. It's kind of like the same thing I ran into with the VA papers back 15 years ago. If you don't know how to dot the I's and cross the T's, you're probably going to be, really challenged getting that waiver through. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, we're up to about 40 pages, give or take 10 on a submission. So when somebody comes and says, yeah, we just filled out the 527 or the 534 app, I usually tell them you got about 35 pages to go if you want to make a complete submission, because the VA will request each paper, they'll send you a letter asking for one more piece of paper. And like you said, you go through a lot of time if you don't get everything in. And that doesn't mean to say that even after we submit that many papers that they still don't come back and ask for additional information. So we do our best to send in everything we can possibly send in. Every number we put on it, we try to put a piece of proof of paperwork. We send in a copy of a tax return because we know they're going to go there and look at tax returns. So we try to justify and verify everything we send in, and they still have questions. So yeah, it does pay to talk with somebody who's done it before to get you down the road as best you can.
Well, a lot of times you don't even know what you're supposed to fill in the blanks, and so you might be not presenting the best case for yourself if you don't know it. If you're not one of you that deal with it every day, so
know which program you're asking for. They do several programs on the same application.
Yeah. On Medicaid, it can be even more complicated because there's 37 categories of Medicaid in the state of Indiana. And when you're talking about waiver services or traditional Medicaid for a nursing home, that's one of those categories. And unfortunately, people do try to apply on their own, and often they get wrongful denials because the people who process these cases aren't necessarily specifically trained in all 37 categories. They're following a computer system. And so it does help to go to someone who really understands the laws in these particular areas, who can understand when something's been appropriately denied or incorrectly denied, so that they can get the matter fixed and ensure that benefits are put in place as quickly as possible for that individual.
Yeah, what a professional can add to any of these application processes, it's also almost beyond filling out the paperwork. It's advocating for the position that the person's in, where mistakes happen on the benefit side. So an attorney or a professional can be able to be there with the law as to why this, or the policy as to why this is exempt. This should not count. So there's no mistakes being made.
Yeah, to add to that, I know it's kind of old school, and I can't wait till the world opens back up, but I used to always go to the Medicaid office and do a face-to-face Medicaid interview with the caseworker and sit there and hand them each piece of paper and explain what it was.
Exactly.
It's not it's not uncommon to have a 22-year-old person sitting across from you who maybe doesn't know what, tax-free muni bonds are, or variable annuities, or variable life insurance, or things. So when you can explain each document to that caseworker, and as Rebecca said, explain to them why I'm here and what I'm looking for and where my client is and what they're wanting, And the fact that this is a pension from MetLife, not life insurance, and that this is a health insurance, not life insurance, it really goes a long way to getting the story straight. And because once things get sideways at VA or Medicaid, it's really difficult to get them straight again. So.
Well, I'd like to put my 2 cents in on that one, because that's the biggest aggravation we have, is that because you're not there in an in-person interview, and there has been a change or a turnover in personnel in a lot of these locations, you'll almost have to, just as was mentioned, give them each piece of paper and say, this is what you say you didn't have, and it's in the file. And that gets a little aggravating, but I guess they've got their woes and their problems as well, but it is a major source of, and it strings out the process. And you've got a client that really needs some help and assistance quickly, and we're on our second appeal or something like that. It gets to be really outrageous.
Yeah, we try to make it 4th grade purple crayon easy for everybody.
Earlier we were talking about 3-year lookbacks for VA, 5-year lookbacks for Medicaid. Could you explain what that really means? And then what happens if, oh my God, basically if you're talking to a family, how do you convey to someone to look ahead that far, okay, before it's necessary? I'll stop with that question so far. I'll go more places off that, but that'll be enough to start. So.
Sure. I'm happy to start. The VA and Medicaid each have rules in place to prevent individuals from transferring away all of their assets and then applying to have Medicaid or the VA pay for all of their care. And that is because those benefits are paid with tax dollars and there's a limited amount to go around. So both of those benefits are means tested, meaning you have to fall within certain income and asset guidelines in order to qualify for the benefits. For the Veterans Administration, they want to know if within 3 years of the date of an application for pension benefits, if the applicant transferred or gave away any assets which could have been used to pay for their care expenses. Medicaid asks a similar question, but they want to know in the 5 years preceding a Medicaid application, did the applicant transfer or give away assets which could have been used to pay for the cost of care? Both agencies then, if they determine that gifts were made, will impose transfer penalty periods during which someone will not be eligible for the VA pension, or they will not be eligible for the Medicaid to pay for their care costs because they gave away funds that could have been used to pay for those expenses. Not only is the look back period different, however, when that penalty begins to run is also very different depending on the agency and the type of benefit applied for. So from a VA standpoint, the look back period is 3 years, but once a gift is made within that 3-year period, that penalty begins to run the month after the date the gift was made. For Medicaid, however, if you want to apply for benefits before a full 5 years has passed since the date a transfer was made, that penalty period will not begin until an individual has applied for Medicaid and would otherwise be eligible, meaning they only have $2,000 in countable resources, in order for that penalty period to begin running. So we really have to meet with families and explain how those penalty periods work, because you don't want people transferring assets and not understanding that they may need to retain funds in order to privately pay for care due to a previous transfer that was made to protect assets.
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
I was just going to expand on Rebecca's concise analyses there. And kind of piggyback on our previous topic, and that is, this is also where a professional can advocate for you, because there are exceptions to some of the transfer rules. Not all transfers are subject to a penalty, but you don't know what you don't know. And we can often identify different transfers that are exempt. Under the Medicaid arena, it is presumed that any transfer you're making is for a purpose of becoming Medicaid eligible, but that is the rule for the purpose of becoming Medicaid eligible, and an advocate can become involved if there really are transfers that can't otherwise be undone and they weren't made for a purpose of eligibility. We can try to advocate on behalf of the individual that a penalty shouldn't be involved. So I just kind of wanted to illustrate that as another reason why it's helpful to have a professional helping you through the eligibility process. And I was going to add, Jim, you asked how do you get folks to pre-plan, to plan ahead of time?
Yeah.
Have a global pandemic. That's how you get them to pre-plan. My practice has kind of reversed from what it used to be. I have a lot more people now coming into my office wanting to plan for their care years down the road than the folks that are in crisis right now. So
Interesting.
I'll add to that if I can, Jim, the
Yes,
fact
please.
that I mentioned initially that one of the biggest misconceptions people have is that they have to spend everything down. The second, I won't say it's the second greatest misconception, but it's on the list for sure, is that they shouldn't do any gifting. Sometimes gifting is important, but that needs to be done with the guidance of an attorney or somebody familiar with the area, because you need to reserve, as was mentioned, I think, in previous comments, holding a certain amount of money back to take care of that penalty period. But if it's the difference between somebody given their age and their physical condition and so forth, if it's the difference between doing some gifting now and then absorbing that penalty, or waiting and seeing what the future will provide, in the sense that the people may have a longevity, they may be 100 by the time they pass away. Well, they're not going to have any money left at that point, that's for sure. But if they take advantage of some gifting for their children, it may be that they can isolate that money and still be able to pay through that penalty period and then get on the Medicaid at the appropriate time in the future.
Yeah, we can't stress enough too to get people at the beginning of a healthcare issue to come and see someone like the folks here on the panel, because right now is a great time to pull IRAs down if you have to move some money around to get eligible, because within about 20 days we have 2 tax years. We have this year and next year. So being tax smart, because there's another professional that we need to add to the board, is having tax people talk about if you're going to move assets or cash in assets or rearrange assets, there's always a tax consequence. And you always run into well, you can't gift more than $15,000 a year. Well, they never tell them the old rest of the story that you can really give about $5 million, but we need to have a tax person come and tell you that, because IRS rules and Medicaid rules and VA rules are all different sets of rules. And unfortunately, probably once or twice a quarter, we get somebody who comes in and their parent is really close to passing, and then they try to do everything at the last minute, and then it just is expensive and complicated. And maybe we can help them avoid probate or consolidate a little bit. But at the first inkling of health issue, sit down with somebody, find out what you can do, because if you've got a couple of years, then you can take advantage of the time frames and the look backs and spreading out distributions of IRAs over a couple of years instead of all at once, or things that have cash or accrued interest that could be taxable. So, the sooner the better. The better advice you'll get and the better you'll do, the sooner you talk to somebody.
With what we're talking about here, maybe I'm wrong, but you guys experience this every day, is one of the reluctances that people have of making the pre-planning because they feel like they're giving up some control over their finances or what have you. And what vehicles can you use? I know that there's revocable, irrevocable trust. There's all kinds of different vehicles. What can people use, and what can we do to assure them of some security?
I think that is the issue. If you're planning ahead of time, or let me say it differently, when folks aren't seeing that big bill right in front of them, it's hard to weigh the benefit of planning versus the cost of what it is to me. And one of those costs is I may not have complete control over something. I may not have complete control because I'm gifting things away. Now, before I say that, we talk about transfers, one thing to always remember is there are safe harbors under these rules. Transfer planning is not the only way to get within the rules. You can take things that are countable and put them in a safe harbor, a bucket that doesn't count under their rules. There's other things to sort through, but particularly when there's a spousal situation where one spouse needs care and the other does not, we don't have to give assets away in order for the institutionalized, the ill spouse to get services. Often we can look at exempt planning. But for folks that really are interested in being more aggressive about protecting assets from long-term care years down the road, there are vehicles that can be used. Typically, I don't recommend folks just give assets away to a kid, because you don't know what's going to happen in the life of that kid for the rest of the giftee's life, or giftor's life. So we want to make sure that kid, whatever is being transferred away, is not being subject to that kid's future divorce or debts or disability. So oftentimes we may put those things into a trust. We also try to keep as much control back on the individual as we can. A house is a good example. That's something you can gift into a trust, but still allow the person to reside in the house and get the benefits from the house. You can reserve, depending upon the program, you can reserve an income interest in the trust. So the assets can go in the trust and you still get the income off of it. Now, everyone on the panel should be telling me, well, that doesn't work for VA, and that's right. But for example, Medicaid, maybe you want to reserve an income interest. Maybe you want to leave control over the trustee, so you have the ability to change the trustee. You have control to change who the beneficiaries are. I can't change it back to me, but I can change it to other folks. So there are some ways to be flexible there and not giving up complete control over stuff, even that is transferred. But again, want to reiterate, transfer planning isn't the only way to accomplish eligibility for these programs.
Yeah. I would follow on what Jeff says in the same manner. A lot of times there's a lot of misconceptions. And so what all of us on this panel do when we meet with clients, whether if they're single or married, we're looking at their assets and trying to determine what is already protected under the law, and then making recommendations for any additional planning that might be done. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, Jim. You asked a question about revocable or irrevocable trusts. There are a lot of misconceptions about trusts out there, just as there are with all the types of benefits that we've discussed. And revocable trust planning, typically, if you just go to an attorney and you do a revocable trust for estate planning purposes, while the applicant is still alive or while a spouse is still alive, often does not have provisions in place that are going to protect any of the assets, because that trust is revocable and the person who is applying won't be deemed to have given away money. It is possible in a revocable trust scenario to provide benefits for a surviving spouse that would provide some asset protection for the surviving spouse should the first spouse pass away. But generally speaking, a revocable trust is not done for the purposes of preserving assets for these types of governmental benefits. An irrevocable trust, however, is the type of trust we would use if a transfer of assets is appropriate for the reasons that Jeff just mentioned. You wouldn't necessarily want to put assets just in your children's names, because it could expose those assets to those children's creditors, or if they were to go through a divorce. There are some other cons, and there are also some tax implications as a result of just giving away assets, which can be avoided if you use irrevocable trusts. But the big downside of irrevocable trust planning or any type of transfer of assets is a potential loss of control, because the person who's setting up these things and trying to get asset protection after that look back period runs is no longer going to be able to control the funds that they put in this type of planning. So I wanted to reiterate that even though it is possible to do planning to protect assets, due to that loss of control, you should never put all of a person's assets into one of these types of vehicles. You always want to make sure that that person still retains some assets so that they have enough funds to meet their own needs, and not deprive them of money that they may need to pay things like monthly expenses or non-routine expenses like property taxes or property insurance, income tax payments, things that they might not have to do on a monthly basis, but that they need reserves in order to meet when those obligations become due. So it's important to understand the different things that are needed for that individual, not just plan in a bubble and think only about what would happen if they need long-term care in the future.
And I concur. I'm sorry, excuse me. I was just going to say I concur with both Rebecca and Jeff on keeping as much control for the individual applicant for Medicaid or whatever it might be in their hands. The difference between, say, a irrevocable what sometimes is referred to as a Medicaid trust and a grantor trust, for example, are two types of vehicles that are tailored towards certain applications and with certain results in mind. All of that, especially for people which have a bit more wealth, is something that makes a lot of sense, but it requires somebody that really knows how to put that all together to be able to get the best effect for them by using those trusts.
That irrevocable trust, the person that's putting funds into the trust aren't the beneficiary of the trust. It's generally family members that are beneficiary of that trust. And so I always make sure that the client understands that, you know, I usually use the goofy analyses that why maybe it's your hope that the family uses this money for family purposes, and maybe even for you, if you ever need something, they don't have to. Once that money's in the trust, it's their money. And if they want to take a world cruise while you're sitting at the senior living facility, they can do that. That's their money. So that's, I think that's another important thing to always remember with these irrevocable trusts is I think there's just the misconception that, well, it's still mine, even though it's over there. Well, legally speaking, it belongs to your kids. So if you have any concerns the losing control over those funds, you don't overfund it. Maybe you don't even put funds over there because, as Rebecca said, you don't want to be going back to your kids saying, I need help with my mortgage payment. And they say, oh, no, we're not going to do that. You want to make sure that you've covered all those bases.
Something that came up earlier, I think it was Wes that brought it up, was marrying Medicaid waiver and VA aid and attendance. I'm glad this came up because I've heard both. Yeah, you can, or I've heard you can't. So I would love to know more about how that works. Does that then create a income situation to where they don't qualify unless you do some other vehicle like a Miller's Trust? I mean, which I'm throwing another word in here. How does all that work?
Yeah, adding the VA benefit to someone's case will almost ensure the fact that you get to now do the Miller Trust calculations and math and exercise. But if you do the math on their income, and if someone already makes enough income that puts them into that Miller Trust situation. The Miller Trust situation is when somebody makes 3 times the poverty level in gross income of $783, which is $2,349. So if somebody makes a gross income, or an applicant does, they technically don't qualify for Medicaid unless they reduce their income by setting up a Miller Trust account. And I always kind of liken it to a medical savings account or a health savings account. It's a separate account that has to be used for certain healthcare expenses. But Medicaid will say if you put a few dollars in there to get you down below $2,349, your income is magically reduced. Well, technically it isn't, but according to Medicaid, it makes them happy, so that's fine. But if somebody already makes more than enough to require them to do a qualified income trust, then it really doesn't make any sense to do VA benefits. If somebody is a widow with $600 a month, then yes, adding another $1,228 to that amount when the VA does make sense. And even if it does push you into a Miller Trust situation, it creates more of a positive cash flow for that person that they could have at their disposal. So like all of this planning, it's math. There's no emotion in any of it. It's all math, and if the math says do it, we do it. If the math says don't do it, we don't do it.
Anybody else on that one? Or what about, this may be outside of your guys' wheelhouse, but does it cross over, because it's not in finance or law or what have you, does it force them to change their doctors if they go to that type of a thing? I mean, what other kind of things come into play?
That's a very good question, Jim, because I get a question for people all the time. If my loved one goes on Medicaid, can I get rid of their supplemental health insurance, or are they going to change doctors? So Medicaid is another form of health insurance if an individual is found eligible. Medicare for most individuals is still going to be their primary form of insurance. If they happen to have a supplement, that's going to be their secondary form of insurance. And then Medicaid is a payer of last resort. When people are living in facilities, oftentimes their doctor, it ends up being the doctor who calls on the facility. They may not go outside to as many doctor's appointments, but sometimes they do. They see specialists and other things for their conditions, and not every doctor will accept Medicaid as a form of payment. So I always caution my clients, if they have a Medicare supplement in place, they may want to find out from their physicians if they will take Medicaid as a form of health insurance instead of just Medicare and a supplement. Otherwise, Medicaid in its rules allows an individual to keep enough of their income to pay that supplement on a monthly basis. And so there's no reason that they are required to get rid of it. And sometimes it makes sense to keep it in place depending on the doctors that they see. But there is no mandate that they change doctors just because they have become eligible for Medicaid. Medicaid just works as an additional form of insurance to help pay medical bills or prescriptions to the extent that Medicare and their supplement is not sufficient to do so.
Yeah, to add on to that, I always tell clients, you know, you're always free to do whatever you want with your health insurance, but if you get rid of it and let Medicaid pick up all your deductibles and copays, and you ever come out of the facility, you don't have health insurance, and it's really difficult to get when you're older and have health conditions. So if the Medicaid allows you to keep it, keep it. There's also the Medicare Advantage new plans for dual eligibles, Medicare, Medicaid being dual eligible, that are zero premium, zero copay, and zero deductible, that could really help folks save a lot of money, because the older you get on a Medicare supplement, it could be $200, $300, $400 a month for just the premium alone. So there's a lot of bandwidth in this area that you really need to cover, and meetings could easily go 2 and 3 hours just picking up all of these issues and talking about them one by one. But that's where it's important to bring in other professionals to let them kind of shoulder the weight of questions like that. So
excellent. We have a question from our audience here. And here's the question: can you please talk about the eligibility requirements to receive the aid and attendance benefit? My dad was in the Army from 1958 to 1962. He does not get a military pension. Was this service enough to receive the benefits if he ever needs them? The same for my aunt. My uncle served in the early 60s in his service time, enough to get benefits for her if she ever needs them.
Well, I'll start off on that one. And I'm not sure I really focused in on those dates, but
58 to 62.
One of the requirements is that you have to have served within the periods of war. So you talk about Vietnam, and then there's transitional over to Korea. Then you've got, well, of course, we start with World War II. There's still some of the World War II veterans that are out there as well. But you have to have at least 1 day of active service during that period of war. Doesn't have to be served in the combat area of that particular war, but you have to have been in the service during that period of time. And that includes everything, including the Coast Guard and the Merchant Marines. So along with that, you have to meet certain requirements. Again, we now have the look back period, so you have to take that into consideration. But if your finances are such that you can qualify for that, you can keep a substantial amount of money for a married couple that's allowed. But then you do have to have need. You have to establish the need. So I think maybe it was Wes that brought this up. It's putting it into the formula, just seeing what all of that income adds up to that you've got coming in, and seeing what still, in other words, you can't get aid and attendance if your income is sufficient to cover whatever your medical costs are. You've got to have some deficiency there, some lack of sufficient funds, and a need to be able to get those benefits from the VA. I might say too that with your experience, Jim, on your application there, it is a massive enterprise to get through all that information. The most difficult ones we receive are people that come to us and having been rejected, and then trying to start all over again and get those people qualified for that. Again, there's a number of other things that you have to look at. There's usually a process of learning a little bit about the person in need of the medical assistance. How old are they? Just a general information so that when you make application, you know, for example, and this is sort of a blunt way to put it, but if their life expectancy, it may take you 3 to 6 months or whatever it happens to be if you run into trouble getting them approved, and they may not have a life expectancy to really survive and be able to benefit from the process. So those are the people that really lose out. They do the planning finally, they do what's necessary to get the application put together, but they don't really live long enough to get many of the benefits from going through the process. I'm sure I missed a couple of qualifications. I can't think of any right now. I'll let the others expand on that.
Well, the particular, the precise answer on the service time here, I think that's what the person's asking about. You know, you're right, Ron. There's basically three elements to eligibility. Are you a veteran, or are you married to a veteran? Are you disabled? Is there a financial need? So that definition of veteran for folks who served prior to 1980 is that person had 90 days of active duty, and at least one of those days was a declared period of war. So 58 to 62, the only possibility would be Vietnam's conflict started in 64, but if you had your feet in Vietnam, the declared period of war started in 61. So if this person was in Vietnam on Vietnamese soil on 61 or 62, then there is the potential they met that requirement, and that's what you'd have to look at there. Generally, though, it's just active duty. So if I'm active during World War II, but I was in New York City at the harbor doing something with the military base, that would be enough. But that's the kind of the lone exception there on the Vietnam conflict.
Well, and Jeff, thank you. If I might, I may have misspoke. The 1 year has to be within that period or the 1 day has to be within that period of a war.
Sure.
Active duty, but it is 90 days total that you have to be in consecutively to qualify.
Yeah, and that doesn't disqualify you from other VA programs. I don't know how many hundred different programs the VA offers, but the one we're talking about is aid and attendance. You know, compensation is for people who are injured in the war due to their service. DIC is for people who lost spouses in the war. Aid and attendance is a age-related health issue, which most all of us have age-related health issues. So if you don't qualify for one program, then don't think you shouldn't look into other programs like the VA Roudebush Hospital in Indianapolis. You know, there's different qualifications for every VA program. So don't go away downhearted if you don't qualify for one. Every program has different qualifications.
I would add to that, we've been talking about the general qualifications for, service qualifications, I should say, for the pension benefit. Ron and Jeff touched on them a little bit as well, and I think Wes did as well. Once you meet the hurdle of the service qualifications, you're then going to have to meet the financial requirements of the program, and that's where an advocate can assist you, because there is an asset limit, which is approximately $130,000, and that includes not just certain resources that the person has in terms of accounts and investments, but it does include income that they have, less the amount that they are paying in care expenses. So you want to make sure that you not only meet the service requirements, but that you meet the financial eligibility requirements of the program as well.
Yeah, one last thing too is surviving spouses. So as long as you were married, this one's kind of tricky, but as long as you were married to a veteran as your last spouse at the veteran's time of death, or currently a spouse can also qualify for benefits. So they don't want everybody that was married to the veteran. They just want the last spouse who was married to them currently or at the veteran's time of death. And they can qualify as well, even if they were not veterans themselves. And there's a bigger population of those folks than there are veterans. So
Yeah, that's true.
Guys, thank you so much. I cannot believe it's already been an hour again. It's just these things can go on, and there's more and more and more we should be covering. Is there anything in particular that any one of you go, if you had a chance to just say to people, I wish you would listen to this particular thing? Do you have a pet thing that you want to get out in this last couple of minutes?
Don't listen to neighbor Bob the plumber. He probably does not have all the details correct. Good intentions, but not always correct details.
I'd echo.
Go ahead, Becky.
I was gonna say, I would just echo that and say it's important to get the facts, to go to someone who really works in this area, who will guide you appropriately, and not just try to look things up on the internet or speak to your neighbor or family friend. You want to speak to someone who's really going to explain the law to you thoroughly and can make sure that you meet the eligibility requirements for these programs.
I would say that crisis management is not the way to do this. People come in, they're just absolutely scared stiff because they don't know what they're going to do next. Somebody's had a stroke, whatever it might happen to be. What I would want to get through to the public at large is the more time you have to prepare, the more usually can be done to get you in a better position.
And since all three of those were great answers, I'm just going to maybe switch just a little bit here to something that's more current event. I'm seeing a lot of folks in my practice who are struggling to take care of somebody at home because they don't want them to go to a facility, not only because of potential exposure, but they just don't want to be unable to visit their loved one for who knows when. And so I know there's a lot of folks out there that are taking care of their families at home. I hope you'll learn from today that there are benefits available to give you some respite. You don't have to do this 24/7. Through the VA program, the pension program, there's some ways to get you some help at home. And we're glad to, I know all of us will be glad to help you.
Well, thank you guys. I want to do a real quick screen share to just basically show people where you could find stuff. Right here, this video eventually will be right under here on Life's Copilot under the resources over at Video Library. Upcoming events, what we have coming up, you can always see what's next on the calendar. The next one coming up, this was our last one for December, but in January we have one, a phenomenal team coming together. That's January 14th on memory care, dementia, and Alzheimer's. We've got some great great panelists there, so this will be another really good one. So guys, thank you so much for coming. I truly appreciate your time today. I will tell you, I know myself, I sleep better because I know all you guys. Okay, so it's because before this was a very scary dark hole. Okay, because it can be very terrifying out there. It's wonderful knowing there's people like you there to take care of us and help us get through the navigate. So thank you for coming. Thank you for anybody that's attending. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.